So I want to tell you a little bit about a couple enormous mistakes I made in misjudging people and how unexpectedly awesome they can turn out to be. So 2 of the 3 people I want to tell you about I met through politics back in my home part of Pennsylvania. So I'm from Center County, and it's home to Penn State University and not a whole lot else. They call that part of the state Pennsyltucky. There's this enormous cultural divide between the university crowd and the rural crowd. And I was born kind of right on that fault line. My parents had a beef farm, so growing up there were more pictures of other children showing our farm's animals at the county fair than of me. I'm an only child. But they were also, the way they actually paid the bills was they were public school teachers. So I grew up nerdy enough to be interested in politics in Afghanistan when I was in high school, when normal people were up partying and getting laid. So graduated high school, went off to college in New Jersey, and every fall I do political campaigns in New Jersey. And in the summer I'd come back and work in central Pennsylvania. And when I graduated in May '08, it was Obama fever. It was my dream come true to be a field organizer for Barack Obama in my home county. That was, it's like a 48-52 county, super close. And we were hell-bent that that was finally going to be the year that we won that county. So if you know anything about political campaigns, field organizers live and die by their volunteers. Our volunteers, we train them, we recruit them, they go out and they do all the door knocks and phone calls and voter registration that makes us look good. So we love them like family. And a lot of my volunteers were people you'd expect to be good at politics. I had a former VP at Penn State, professors, psychologists, labor union leaders, but I want to tell you a little bit about Mike. So Mike, I saw him at the big regional headquarters in State College, because I grew up in the country. I was working out in the sticks and the Republican turf where they really didn't like us very much. But I would go into the regional headquarters to check in, and I saw him there a couple times just doing data entry. And I know exactly why the field organizers at that office had kind of pigeonholed him into that. This kind of short guy, pudgy, wore like really nerdy glasses, very socially awkward, not the person you think who would go out and be talking to voters and be very charismatic. But one day I decided to talk to him, and I found out he was actually from my part of the county, and he was driving an hour and a half round trip every single time to just sit at a computer and do data entry for a cause he really believed in. And I found that pretty awesome, and I talked to him some more. Turns out he was really good with computers, not just like played World of Warcraft, but really good with computers. And I was setting up these rural offices where we couldn't afford phone lines, but we had internet access, and we had a bunch of crappy, donated, Pentium 1 computers running Windows 98, and I had to get those to be able to use Skype so we could actually make phone calls out. That was a huge part of my turf, because you're out in the country, you can't really go door to door, you have to make phone calls, it's the only way to reach people. So he agrees to come out, and 2 hours later, boom, doubled my phone call capacity, best consultant ever. And then I figured that was all he'd be willing to do. It was IT stuff. But I asked, because you're a field organizer, you always ask, well, would you be willing to make a couple phone calls? And this was, you're calling strangers, asking them who they're voting for, and then trying to talk them into voting for your guy. So it's very awkward for people who don't like talking to strangers. And he really hated it at first, but he was really motivated, he was really dedicated, and eventually he got good at it. Eventually he started I got him to go door knock his little town, Howard Borough, 1 precinct, less than 100 people, and he was the best ambassador for the Obama campaign ever, because he was Mike, so-and-so's kid, not, some outsider like me or some college kid going in there and telling those people, you should vote for the black guy. So he was the best damn volunteer I had. And then you get close to the election, my office managers were burning out, because we're doing operations all the time, and I knew he was available. So I asked him, hey, would you help me run my office down in Bellefonte, the second biggest town in the county, second biggest town in my turf where I was operating. He agreed to do it. And I was able to focus on another town in a neighboring county. It was a university. A ton of stuff went wrong. It was very important to the campaign. And because I wasn't there, I was just kind of leaving it off to him and a couple other people. We won that town by 50 votes. We'd gotten slaughtered there 4 years earlier. So, and everything I heard about him through the campaign was that he did great. So that was something I, judged him. I just thought he was this kind of computer nerd who wouldn't be, really worth that much to the campaign. And he was doing everything I was doing by the time the end of the campaign rolled around. So that's Mike. One of the volunteers Mike was coordinating was a guy named Bill Kayer. Now Bill, I met him when he was running for Congress. He was the son of a couple bigwigs at Penn State. He'd worked at Capitol Hill, then a political journalist. And when our congressman retired, he kind of, carpet-bagged home to try to run for Congress. Now, the one cool thing about Bill that I kind of grudgingly respected was that he joined the Marine Reserves after 9/11, but I just kind of thought he was a political hack, and like all my cynical political friends were like, oh, he just joined the military for politics, which now is kind of funny. There's a lot of people who probably say that about me. But so I got to know Bill. I didn't vote for him. He lost the primary. My candidate also lost. And we just thought he'd go back to D.C. because that's what political hacks do. They try to get a congressional seat, it doesn't work, they go back to the halls of power. But he stuck around. And one day he came into my office in Bellefonte to be a volunteer. And I was like, sure, why not? He was one of the most dedicated people we had. Bellefonte is this little hilly town. He, rain or shine, would come in, take a bunch of walk packets and just go door to door. And I'll tell you, having someone who was an Iraq veteran making the case for your candidate is an awesome asset when you're a political organizer. So, so Bill did, he did his volunteer stuff. We won the campaign. I joined the Army. His reserve unit got called up, so he ended up deploying to Afghanistan. He was a civil affairs sergeant, trying to build roads and schools in that country, trying to fulfill America's promises to the Afghan people. And I really respected that about him once I got to know him a little bit better. And one day he was out on patrol, Helmand Province, and some lucky bastard Taliban, one shot right here. And Bill died. His wife Renee was pregnant with twins, their first children, when he was deployed. So I found out about this when I was in intel training. My mom called me up and said, hey, Bill Carey got shot. And I was just thinking, I thought he was a hack. And then I thought, oh yeah, he's a stand-up guy, he's a good vol, on the same plane as my other volunteers. He was a fucking hero, and I didn't see it. So, there's no grand moral out of that, but it's just, Bill was a great guy, and I was too dumb to see it. So there's probably a lot of great people in your lives that you might not see. So that's Bill. So I got my crack at Afghanistan later that year, 2009. I was an analyst, nothing like Kevin. I was behind a computer at a big American base. Ironically, I was a targeting analyst, so my job was essentially to judge people, read reports and say this guy is a Taliban leader or he's just, a farmer who's being falsely accused because his neighbor doesn't like him and wants the U.S. to arrest him. So I do that deployment, come back to the States, spend a year and a half in the Army, desperately trying to get back to Afghanistan. Finally, fall 2011 rolls around, we get deployment orders, I'm pumped, I managed to talk my way into this trainer gig. Training Afghan intelligence officers. And that's where I met Coey. So Coey was in the Afghan National Army, and when I first met him, it was this joint intelligence meeting, the Afghan police, the Afghan Army, their Afghan CIA, and they're all arguing. And Coey is this huge troublemaker, and he's just getting in fights with the other guys there, and just like, who is this guy? So I start working with him, and it was really hard because he spoke about 3 words of English: yes, no, and fuck. And that was about all the Dari I knew, except I didn't know what fucking Dari was. So I started picking up the language, I get to know him. I realized most of the fights he had with the other Afghans is because he was pushing them to work harder. He was the dedicated and motivated one. He lost two and a half fingers to the Taliban before 9/11. He'd been fighting the very same enemy we were kind of Johnny-come-latelys to for years. And every time I proposed a reform to the Afghan system, even if it was more work for him, even if it used up his political capital, when it was just getting them to type reports or getting them to actually do value-added analysis rather than just, passing it from one agency to the other, he always had my back. And so rather than it just being the Americans, me, telling the Afghans what to do, I had someone on the inside making my case, and he was always so dedicated and passionate about it. He went head-to-head with the Afghan bureaucracy, which Kevin can tell you is a bloody nightmare, when directed the provincial governor to get them to actually force the Afghan army and police and CIA to work together on investigations. And he was a friend. Late at night, we smoked so many cheap Chinese counterfeit cigarettes. We drank a ton of chai, talked about his family. I tried to explain what the GMAT was. And it was just this outlet, because I was there for 11 months, and I loved my job, but I needed him there. So just to say, like, those three, and Coe, like, my resume is like Afghanistan, a little bit Obama. There's no way I would be here. I'd be here at Sloan if it hadn't been for Coe helping me accomplish the mission that we were trying to do in Afghanistan. So, you know, when I looked at those three people in my life, I saw a nerd, a hack, and a troublemaker. And I was really, really wrong about all of them, and really glad I was. So just remember that in your own lives.